Said there were 4 things that you found were changing people from undecided to no. I didn't write fast enough. Could you try again?
The first and foremost is parental consent, and the parental consent has kind of a two-pronged aspect. First, parental consent is eliminated for abortion. That's one. The second prong is that parental consent is eliminated for sterilization, and it opens up the cross-sex hormones. The second thing is abortion through 9 months, including partial birth abortion. The third thing is the fact that this would eliminate our, do you have it as a physician? Oh, I might be saying it out of order, I apologize. But it would get rid of our physician-only requirement that physicians actually perform abortions, and then it eliminates our health and safety regulations on abortions that are currently being done.
Jenny, you had made the point that the in vitro would be paid for in full. I'm assuming that means the state has to pay in full for the transgender junk too.
So we wouldn't know that for sure. It opens up the door for it.
Fundamental right.
Fundamental, yeah.
Yeah, fundamental right, and it eliminates, like Rebecca said, one of the things that we have in there is taxpayer protections for things. And so this does open that door. How that plays out, we wouldn't know.
Yeah, people have raised that it could be those who are on the Medicaid program, right? So if they're getting other types of pregnancy care, then you can't say they can't have abortion, provided through the Medicaid program. Other people have talked about how there's implications for those in our prisons who the state pays for their care. And so again, with this proposal, one of the things to keep in mind is that there's a lot to it. I think every time I read it, there's always, something else comes to mind, like, oh, I wonder about this or that. And the thing is, this is, one of the things to keep in mind, this just goes way beyond Roe, and there's a lot, that is going to be impacted.
Speaking of Roe, and not meaning to sound ignorant, but I am on this, what in Michigan was allowed when Roe was enforced?
All of the health and safety protections that we had in place, that we, currently have in place.
But in terms of like abortion, late-term abortions, there were restrictions?
Yes, yeah, we have a ban on partial birth abortion, a ban on abortion after fetal viability with that old definition, or the current definition of viability that they're trying to change. But we had, parental consent, we had health and safety regulations, we had informed consent, and so these are the things that are in jeopardy. Yep.
I have the microphone. Sorry. I know you wanted to end. 1931 law, it's been enjoined. What is the status of that? Because it's very confusing when you have some prosecutors not enforcing, other ones saying you can, then there's an injunction. Like, what's happening with the 1931 law, and how is that related to this? I certainly know that if this was voted yes, that would render that unconstitutional, but what's happening? Let's say this gets voted down. What's the status of the 1931 law?
So there are, I think, 2 lawsuits in 3 courts right now. I haven't seen much action on it. I think part of that is because the Supreme Court in particular is waiting to see what happens with Proposal 3. So the governor has directly appealed to the Michigan Supreme Court, asking them to find a constitutional right to abortion in our state constitution, similar to how the federal the U.S. Supreme Court did with Roe, right, which was just overturned. So that's what she has asked, and again, those cases are sort of, at this point, as far as I know, paused. I haven't checked for any latest, but I think if there was any development, I probably would have heard about it. So I'm trying to think of what else to address. So you mentioned some prosecutors. There was some news for a very short period of time, I think a matter of hours, where the Court of Appeals actually ruled that the Court of Claims, who had initially invalidated the law, that they didn't actually have the right, the jurisdiction to do that over these prosecutors, because the Court of Claims typically deals with state matters, and that their reach didn't reach to these prosecutors. So the Court of Appeals said these prosecutors, this injunction doesn't apply to them. But then immediately, the court in Oakland County that the governor had filed, she filed in Oakland County and also appealed directly to the Michigan Supreme Court. And so that judge in Oakland County, within hours, it issued another injunction. So across the board, the law is enjoined and not enforceable. The lawsuits will continue to play out, but I imagine that there's a number of judges that are just waiting to see what happens with Proposal 3 before they proceed.
The reason why I think it's important is that some people might say, hey, you're giving me a choice between having abortion on demand and actually having no abortions whatsoever. You're going to have some pro-choice people say, hey, look, this might be extreme, but this is the only way, because they might fear if this is not voted yes on, right, that everything's going to be banned no matter what. Right, so it seems like voters are in between a rock and a hard place. I'm just concerned about like what is being said about if this is not voted in, then this is going to be the case. Then the 31 law is going to be enforced, and everyone's not going to be able to have abortions.
Mm-hmm. So the other thing that comes to mind is the 1931 law is a statute. You do not need a constitutional amendment to invalidate that statute, right? I believe that there are many of good reasons to defend the 1931 law, and that can be a discussion for another day. But for those who are concerned about that, the legislature, it's a law. The legislature can change this 1931 ban. We don't have to have a constitutional amendment, let alone such an extreme, radical amendment in our state constitution. So. And again, this is enjoined, and I think there's some people that probably question whether that injunction will eventually become permanent. So as it goes, continues to be considered by the courts. So this amendment goes too far and is not needed to address concerns with the 1931 law that people may have.
I'm actually kind of surprised that no one ever talks about the abortion pill. I just heard a statistic that actually more than half, 60% of abortions now, more than half are actually done with the abortion pill. And people can get the abortion pill at their local drugstores, wherever. And even if the abortion pill would be outlawed in Michigan, which it's not right now, I mean, people can send over to India and wherever, and I think it would be hard to regulate. But that's something that even if we defeated Prop 3, which says and our law would go back to 1931. I mean, the abortion pill I don't think is addressed in that. I mean, so people can still get abortions, and most of them abortions are done with the pill. Do you hear any talk about that? Is that ever brought up?
It's not one of the things that we're, when we look at the language of this proposal, it's not necessarily one of the primary talking points, but I mean, there's definitely, implications, as you say, it would be hard to regulate. But again, the key with this proposal is just how extreme it is, and it is not needed in Michigan. In fact, would be very detrimental to women's health.
I think I'd like to just jump in here on that. So abortion pill is a problem. Prior to COVID, in order to get the abortion pill, you needed to see a doctor in person. This was under the FDA regulations on the abortion pill, because you cannot take the abortion pill after a certain week's gestation, right? Because it can kill you, right? It can kill you. And so the FDA has changed that regulation because of COVID, and allowed doctors to prescribe the abortion pill without seeing the patients. And they did not change this back. So the abortion pill after 12 weeks gestation is very, very dangerous. It is used off-label up to 16 weeks gestation. And if you've ever worked with pregnant women, which I work with a lot of pregnant women, they're usually wrong on when they conceived. And especially teenage girls. So what we're doing here with this law is this proposed amendment is we're opening up the door to have girls who don't know when they conceived get a pill from a doctor who doesn't verify how far along they are and then cannot be prosecuted when something happens to that girl.
Would that then allow that pill to be over the counter?
No, so the FDA regulations on that, it's actually 2 pills, first and foremost. But those pills in particular are highly regulated because of how dangerous they really are.
I had one other question. So with Prop 3, is it going to allow for infanticide? And if so, can you explain how?
Yeah, so that is one of the provisions we didn't get a chance to talk about. I didn't know how long to take, but it does have implications, unfortunately, for infanticide. And that comes from this provision. So section 3, we talked about the second sentence where someone, can't be held accountable for aiding or assisting with voluntary consent. Well, that first sentence pertains to the individual, the pregnant individual. So it says the state shall not penalize, prosecute, or otherwise take adverse action against an individual based upon their actual, potential, perceived, or alleged pregnancy outcomes, including but not limited to miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion. So this language, unfortunately, opens the door for infanticide because of a woman's perceived pregnancy outcome. So if she gives birth at home and maybe the baby dies of natural causes, maybe the baby dies of unnatural causes, but due to this perceived pregnancy outcome, the state wouldn't be allowed to even investigate what happened. And so that's where this is the provision that opens the door for infanticide.
I've already started talking to some people about this, and for the fun of it, I went to a house with all the Democratic signs on the lawn. I mean, everybody and their brother. And I wanted to hear what they would have to say when I asked them if I could put a Prop 3 sign out there. And one of the things they threw at me, and I would like some information, and you probably have numbers, what percentage of abortions are due to rape and incest in this country?
Yeah, I'll let you
It's less than 3%.
Yeah, in Michigan, that number is not tracked. So Guttmacher, which is sort of the former research arm of Planned Parenthood, they have somehow come up with this, but it is not actually tracked for Michigan.
That's less than 3%, but that includes life of the mother as well. So they always lump in rape, incest, and life of the mother. They don't separate them out.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you both, Jenny and Rebecca, for your time and your expertise. So I have a comment and a question. So I have been doing some door knocking. So if anyone here is interested in getting involved with that, I can certainly help to get you set up. We use an app that tries to highlight the middle ground houses, and it's pretty good, and there's a lot of houses in the area, so we could definitely use some help getting as many houses knocked as we can. So if you're interested, you can find me afterwards and I can help get you set up. My question is, so if this does not pass, is there any kind of time frame for when it might come back around? Is that possible at all? Or if it does not pass, is it done for good?
That's a good question. But first, I just wanted to bring up with the door knocking, make sure you go in pairs. So make sure you always have a buddy if you decide to do door knocking. Make sure you take someone with you. And thank you for doing that. I was so grateful that people are being able to reach out to their neighbors or others. So the sort of question, or the answer to your question is that, can this come up again? And it surely can. They would have to go through the same process, either collecting signatures and then having enough valid signatures for it to go on the ballot, and then we may have to fight it again at the ballot. The other way the Constitution is amended is if a supermajority of the legislature approves a measure for it to then go to the ballot, or if there's a constitutional convention, which is very, very rare. So they would ultimately have to go through the same process again. Clearly, they got enough signatures this time. One thing that was interesting, though, of the sample, so they turned in, I think, 760 or 770,000 signatures initially, and of that, a sample is taken, and it's my understanding of the sample, like 80 or 90% of the signatures were gathered after Dobbs overturned Roe. So there's a very short time period. There's a lot of people very active, and it took about $8 million for them to be able to get these signatures and then get this on the ballot. So it would really just be a matter of whether they want to go through that expense again. I think it would be a poor choice if the people of Michigan vote this down. I think that's sending a clear message, but as we all know, this is a battle that we always are going to have to be fighting to some extent. So it likely, it could come back again, and we'd have to re-educate people, but it's in God's hands, and we're going to keep moving forward regardless of the outcome.
So you guys are with Protect Life Michigan, correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's I was kind of recruited with like a young professionals group that I work with, but yeah, it's kind of all under the same umbrella.
Because I do provide a little video of training, so things like what Rebecca said, to go by pairs or don't go at night or stuff like that is all there, so it's pretty useful.
How many of you are going door to door? Raise your hand. All right, thank you. These people deserve a round of applause.
Are the Protestant churches being included in this information? I mean, they must have some of the information, I'm sure, but have they become as intense with it as we have?
Father
I'm
has
going to pitch that to
something
Father
say.
Mathias.
I sent out a letter today to all of the pastors in the entire Brighton community with information like this and links to some of the information. I'm hoping to do some follow-up in a couple weeks or even just next week, but yes, I've sent letters, emails and letters out to them. I actually think the letters are going out Monday, but the emails are all out to all the pastors, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, we're trying to lead on Christian unity on this point. This is where we're very united, and so we'll see what happens. But if we just had more signs, I could deliver signs to them. The lack of signs is...
I know somebody, I'll ask him.
Your polling, I thought that was pretty compelling, about 54% changing their mind. Where is that? Because if you post that on social media, people are going to ask you, well, where's that at? Where's that poll at?
That's internal polling, we didn't post it.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been door knocking, and one of the things that was mentioned is they would like to do their own research into the facts. Do you have the state of Michigan web address to get to these documents?
Could you clarify, like what documents that would
The actual amendment, the proposal. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Probably the prior laws, as they are.
Well, that's the thing. They're not telling us what laws. We've had attorneys through Citizens to Support Michigan Women and Children who've determined that it's gonna be dozens, I think it's like 41 or 47 laws that they believe will be invalidated by this language. The other side will only say the 1931 law. And so that is, but if you look at the language that's going to be on the ballot, it says invalidate, as you can see that last clause there, invalidate state laws. And so that is harder to find because it's not, it's more of kind of looking at the language and considering our current laws and kind of how they would be applied. Because again, being a constitutional amendment, anything that doesn't comport with it is going to be determined to be, unconstitutional. So, but the language for the ballot proposal on this, for the state of Michigan, you would go to the Board of Canvassers, so the Michigan State Board of Canvassers. And on their website, you would be able to find the language that will be on the ballot. It's a little bit harder on their website to find the
I'll send it to Patricia.
Yeah, amendment language.
Can we get it out?
But again, the amendment language, the other side doesn't want people to see. So again, it's a little bit harder to find. We have it on our websites. But I think you have to dig a little bit further with the Board of Canvassers, and I'm happy to get links to Jenny and page numbers of things to show you.
I think one thing that's helpful that everyone can understand, and you don't need to be an attorney to see this, when you look at the actual proposed language on the Board of Canvassers website and you scroll down, there's a section right under the proposed language that says areas of the Constitution to be altered or abrogated, right? So these are areas that the reproductive freedom for all people were required by law to list that are going to be altered, that are already in our Constitution. Some of the highlights for me that are very scary: stem cell. So our Constitution protects against stem cell research, and that is clearly listed at the bottom under the areas to be abrogated or altered. And then it goes through and it talks about the part of our Constitution that allows our legislator to regulate public health. And that's where the vast majority of these laws are going to fall under. And so all you have to do is have the actual language in front of you. And remember, they're not going to see this at the ballot box, because all they're going to see on the ballot is the summary that has that invalidate all laws. But on the actual language, there's a whole list of things in our Constitution that are going to be either altered or altogether thrown away.
I just want to clarify, because I've gotten some questions about the alter and abrogate. There's not going to necessarily, those sections, there's 8 of 12, right? I think 8 of 12 sections of the Constitution that the other side put forward, our attorneys reviewed and determined that that was accurate. There's going to be these 8 sections of the Constitution that will be modified in how they're interpreted and applied. So the language of these amendments would not necessarily, constitutional provisions would not necessarily change. When this language for Proposal 3 is if it were to be inserted into our state constitution, how all of those 8 provisions are applied to state law, that would change, like their application, not necessarily the actual language of those other provisions.
I'm just gonna present a hypothetical. So if I have a student in high school and the teachers, without my knowledge or consent, have been giving this student puberty blockers and hormonal treatment, and even, I believe the law even allows for surgery, secretive surgery, having breasts removed and all of this stuff. It doesn't specifically state that, but seems to be open, and this happens all, and I find out about it after it's a done deal. I believe that there's part of the huge problem with Proposal 3 is the vagueness of the language, that everything is open-ended. So there's so much of this this could happen. So, and I know that it states in there that there will be no repercussions or ability to sue, whether it be a health provider, the social worker, the acupuncturist, or the athletic trainer who can be involved in some of this. But I'm anticipating, if this would pass, that parents may start to sue and object, and who gets to define this, it could happen, and all this vagueness that, is not spelled out, which is normally the case in any constitutional amendment. Who gets to decide this?
The courts, judges. So ultimately, it's, a lot of this is going to go to the Michigan Supreme Court. That's to kind of parse out and determine. But keep in mind, when it's going to them, the court has to interpret these words, right? So they're interpreting to the word every individual, not just individual, but every individual, with no age limit. So the judges will be ultimately interpreting. And one thing to keep in mind is that with parental rights and parental consent and knowledge and parents' rights to be involved in their child's life is too important to be left to chance, to be left to a judge to determine whether those rights exist or not. And very likely, given the words of this amendment, they would not have those rights under this amendment regarding the reproductive freedom.
Just one other quick thing. Do you have any polls and information on how many people even understand the loss of parental rights? To me, it's two separate bills. You have the bill that is unlimited abortion, absolutely unlimited, and the other amendment, and the other part of the amendment is that parents are going to lose all of their parental rights when it comes to anything that has to do with any sexual, changes, and even I'm wondering what's going to happen even when you have elementary students, because there's no age limit. So getting back to the focus of the question is there polling that Michigan Catholic Conference has done? Do you think even the majority of the people understand the other part of this amendment on parents' rights?
That's a good question. I think what the polling shows is that is, once people know that is very compelling. Obviously, parents' rights are under attack in many ways across the country, and parents have been getting more involved, which is wonderful, and they should be in their children's lives. And so I don't know that there's anything that shows kind of where people are at now. I'm not aware of that number, but I think it's definitely a compelling argument to get that word out there. And again, the key with this is, as we look at all of these implications, legal and moral, that Proposal 3 has, the key is to inform people so that people will have, an idea and will be going, to vote with a more, a good understanding of what this could actually happen, as opposed to just hearing and knowing, oh, this restores Roe, and then heading to the ballot box. So getting the message out there of all of these dangers that are included.